Kumathong Chapter 4. After hearing that, I let the phone drop, allowing the sound of Daifong's voice to continue coming from the speaker, sounding distant and close at the same time. I collapsed again, drifting off to sleep. Lately, it's been like this every day. I just can't sleep. I don't even know when I became addicted to sedatives. I take more pills in a day than I eat meals. But taking them doesn't help me sleep or make me sleep better. On the contrary, they cause me to have overlapping dreams. When I wake up, I can no longer distinguish between dreams and reality. I am haunted by Hoi in a form with bones broken and bent, relentlessly chasing after me. When I feel scared and want to run, I suddenly realize my body now resembles hers too. With each movement, another joint snaps and cracks, the pain indescribable. Sometimes, the pain becomes too much, and I close my eyes, allowing her horrifying form to approach. But closing my eyes only makes it worse. Not knowing how close she is or what she plans to do to me. So I force myself to keep my eyes open and endure the pain of my shattered bones as I keep moving. It doesn't end there. Just when I think I've woken up, drenched in sweat, reaching for a bottle of water on the table and gulping it down, I suddenly freeze, feeling something sharp pierce through my throat, puncturing my stomach. It seems similar to the rare water allergy disease of a person who died on the floor. Below, a story I had overheard once. I shudder, cold sweat pouring down as my sweat glands transform into prickly balls that stab through my skin, bringing me unbearable pain. Sometimes I sit still, immobilized by the overwhelming agony. Other times, I roll around, biting down to bear the sensation of thousands of sharp nails piercing through my flesh, just wishing for death. But, of course, I don't die. When I got a call from Daifong, I still didn't know whether it was a dream or reality. He was faintly telling me about the deaths of the mother and child, upstairs in a mental illness that nobody could diagnose. Suddenly, I felt an unbearable itch, as if thousands of tiny creatures were crawling under my skin. After hanging up the phone, I looked down to see small circular holes forming hexagonal patterns all over my body. At first, I couldn't see them clearly, but they gradually expanded, rising and falling like green threads, resembling caterpillars with black fangs and prickly spines covering their backs. My flesh was tearing apart, full of holes like a lotus pod, with the creatures continuously emerging and retreating, like fish gasping for air before diving back down. I couldn't pull them out. All I could do was madly dig with tweezers, tearing my skin into deep, gruesome wounds shaped like the lotus pod nests they created. Anne Bean, wake up. What pills did you take? It was Daifong's voice. Was he real or just a dream? I opened my heavy eyelids and realized I was on a stretcher, being carried to an ambulance. I could faintly see that the stretcher carrying the bodies of the mother and child, Hong, was being wheeled out at the same time. Green plants or insects, I couldn't tell, had burst through their blood vessels, covering their skin and leaving it riddled with holes like a lotus pod, just like me. But there was no sign of blood on the surface. So, what I saw before me were simply their corpses, completely devoured by the creatures. I felt a cold shiver run through my body, leaving me weak and powerless. Suddenly, a hand turned my head to the side. It was Daifeng, speaking into my ear. "It's nothing. Don't be afraid." His calm appearance helped settle my nerves a little. He held my hand tightly, as if trying to transfer some hope to me, that everything would be okay. Looking into his sympathetic, pained eyes, I could tell that I must have looked awful. The police investigation concluded that Hong had been desperately seeking treatment for some strange disease her child had, but all the doctors insisted she was mentally unstable, and that her child wasn't sick at all. So, they concluded that after hearing about her husband's death, Hong had lost her mind, and, in a fit of despair, decided to commit suicide with her child by using charcoal briquettes, leading to carbon monoxide poisoning. Case closed. "Who discovered their bodies?" I asked. "Apparently, someone who lived downstairs. They said Hong's apartment had been making loud crashing noises all night, so they went up to check. When no one answered the door, they called someone to break it down. That's when they found the bodies and called the police." Daifeng summarized what he knew as I lay in the hospital. I asked again, "Did they find anything strange?" "What do you mean by strange?" he asked, confused. "Oh, never mind. I just said that without thinking." Later, the police came to take statements. Since we had visited Hong's apartment once, but because we didn't have a close relationship with her, and nothing suspicious came up, they left after about 2 hours. While I was in the hospital, Daifeng placed a strange-looking statue at the head of my bed, telling me that it would protect me from the nightmares. In just a short time, I had lost a significant amount of weight, becoming gaunt. But I didn't dare call home. When my parents called to check on me, I assured them I was fine and told them to stay in the countryside for now. I didn't want them to be in danger. I needed to find the reason behind this, deal with the Kumathong, and then my parents could return safely. A week after the mother and child's death, thanks to the medical care in the hospital, and maybe the statue working, I felt better, no longer plagued by nightmares. But I still struggled to sleep, waking up with dark circles and sunken eyes like a panda every morning. Daifeng visited me daily, always smiling and sharing funny stories. But I couldn't shake the feeling that, deep down, he was carrying an invisible fear. After a period of stability with nothing happening, I thought maybe it was over. Perhaps it had claimed enough victims to be satisfied. Hatred, or any emotion, for that matter, fades with time. Even the immense grudge of that child must have diminished after the deaths. If it wanted to play, maybe it had played enough. I know this thought is selfish, but I sincerely hoped it wouldn't harm anyone else or come back for me. Let those others have been unlucky. I didn't want, or think I could, seek revenge or try to destroy it anymore. I just wanted it to leave me alone. That would be enough. On the 8th night, I had returned home, and Gok and Daifeng came over for dinner. Afterward, we ate some fruit, drank a little fruit beer, and sang to unwind. The speaker system. My dad bought it before. Back when things were still okay. When my sister still lived at home, everyone loved singing. So my dad was always upgrading the speakers. I forced a smile, but for some reason, tears started streaming down my face. Suddenly, a deafening noise came from the speakers, causing all three of us to cover our ears. And Gurk yelled, "Did you forget to turn off the mic again?" My ears are ringing. The noise abruptly stopped. Thinking it was just a technical issue with the speakers or mic, we didn't pay it much attention. After seeing Daifong off, Engok and I got ready to shower, brush our teeth, and sleep. We were still laughing in the bathroom, a bit tipsy, when a loud crash rang out, startling us. Before we could even figure out what had fallen, the lights went out, and looking out the bathroom window, it seemed like the entire neighborhood had lost power. Probably another power outage. The water heaters off too. "It's freezing," Engiok shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. A hint of fear crept into my heart, but since Engioki was with me, I tried to stay calm, joking, "Let's just hurry up and finish our shower. The water in the tub should still be warm. It's lucky you're here, or else." My words were cut off by a loud bang. It was the same sound from earlier, coming from the speakers. The noise reverberated in the eerie silence, making it sound even more amplified. What? What is that sound? The power's out. How is the speaker making noise? I stammered, trembling as I clung to Ngok, my whole body shaking, partly from the cold, but mostly from the deep-seated dread crawling up my spine. Anger quickly grabbed a towel and wrapped it around herself. She stepped outside, grabbed some clothes for both of us, threw them on, and we cautiously made our way to the living room where the speakers were. There was no one there. Only the fridge door was open. And, as I had seen before, food was scattered everywhere. Raw meat from the freezer was strewn across the floor, marked with tiny bite marks. Still standing there in shock, not knowing what to do, the sudden ring of the phone made me jump, nearly giving me a heart attack. Running into the bedroom, I saw it was Daifong calling. Feeling uneasy, I wondered why he was calling at this hour. Did he know something had happened? As soon as I picked up, before I could even say hello, I heard his panicked voice. The signal was weak, crackling, and cutting in and out, but I could make out something. It sounded like he was calling for help. "Hey, I can't hear you clearly. What's going on? Hello, hello." All that remained was the sound of wind blowing into the phone. Though I couldn't hear what he was saying, his tone seemed filled with desperation, suddenly overcome with fury. I stomped my foot and rushed out into the middle of the house, screaming. "Is it wrong to try to do a good deed? I brought you in to help you, to give you peace. I haven't asked for anything in return, so why are you hurting everyone around me? Who's commanding you? What do you want from me? If you want my life, then come and take it, but leave everyone else alone." I was genuinely angry. I had initially intended to bring home statues of gods or Buddha to worship, but I foolishly believed the deceitful words of that crooked merchant. He was Vietnamese, yet claimed to have been selling these items in Thailand for generations. I should have realized sooner that he was a fraud, a charlatan exploiting people's faith by selling these malevolent spirits to harm others for his gain. Perhaps he was a sorcerer or some dark practitioner, using kind-hearted Buddhist followers like me, who took pity on abandoned spirits, to bring these cursed Kumathongs into our homes, so they could carry out his orders and claim souls for his rituals. Even the guide who led me to his shop must have been in on it. The more I thought about it, the more foolish I felt. I had willingly brought home an evil spirit, worshipping it, only to have it destroy my family, my neighbors, and now even my close friend Engok, who had been caught in its web, constantly living in fear, wondering what dangers she might face because of me. Now, even someone like Daifong, who was trying to help me, had to face unforeseen risks. It was determined to wipe us all out. Realizing this, I screamed again. "Can you hear me? What do you want from me?" After shouting repeatedly like that, I nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Sitting on the floor, helpless, I felt drained, both physically and mentally. At that moment, I genuinely wanted to die, to escape the mess I had created, the harm I had caused to others. But I had no way of solving it. Suddenly, I looked up to see Engok standing motionless, her posture strangely eerie. Her eyes gleamed with something different, terrified. I scooted back quickly, still sitting. Engok continued stepping toward me, her body bent at those same unnatural angles. I screamed her name, but she didn't react. "Oh God, someone please make this stop." Engok suddenly lunged at me, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me violently. Our eyes met, both filled with despair, as she couldn't control her actions. I felt like my brain was rattling inside my skull, my head pounding as my ears started ringing. Then, without warning, Engok raised her hand and began slapping me repeatedly across the face, head and neck, even as I cried out in pain. "Engok, stop. Snap out of it." I struggled to break free, but she pinned me down beneath her knees, leaving me unable to move. Tears streamed down my face. "Somebody, please, make this stop." Kumathong, chapter all. Anne, open your eyes. I was incredibly surprised when I opened my eyes and found myself sitting in front of the TV. The screen displayed a song title, paused. Engok sat beside me, her face full of concern. She was about to slap me again, but I managed to block her hand in time and asked, "What's going on?" Daifong looked at me and smiled. "We've only sung one song, and you've already fallen asleep." Looking at both of them, I hesitated and asked, "Asleep? Did I really just fall asleep? What else would you call it?" Suddenly remembering something, I stood up and walked over to the fridge. For some reason, I still felt uneasy, seeing me staring at the fridge. Daifong asked, "Hungry? Want me to grab something for you?" I didn't respond. Instead, I walked straight over and flung open the fridge door. Vegetables, fruit, yogurt. Everything was neatly arranged in the same place as before. I pulled out the freezer drawer, and the meat was the same. Was it really just a dream? Daifong grabbed his coat and headed to the door, calling out, "Anne Bean, wash your face to wake up." I thought he was leaving, but he returned shortly after, holding 3 cups of coffee, handing them to me in Oak. I still wasn't fully awake. I sat there, pondering, trying to find a reasonable explanation for everything that had just happened. It all felt too real, making me doubt whether it had been just a short dream. After a while, I looked seriously at the two people in front of me and said, "If its goal is to harm everyone around me, then both of you are definitely in danger too," Engok and Daifeng said in unison. "Who's afraid?" I smiled warily. "You two may not be scared, but I am." Sipping his coffee, Daifeng shared, "This may sound hard to believe, but 2 years ago, my uncle told me that exactly 2 years from then, I would face a major issue with the Kumathong. He said that as long as I could get through it with a certain girl, then, well, I'll tell you more later. What's important is that, even though I didn't believe him, my uncle bought a piece of land, built a house, and told me to take the girl there if what he said came true. The house is protected, and if she stays there, the Kumathong won't be able to bother her anymore. Stay there for a while until we figure out how to destroy it. Does that sound okay?" Engo, all curious, asked, "What are you holding back? Why not just tell us now? You're too suspicious. It's just not the right time yet." I just remembered it earlier while buying coffee. "By the way, this powder is for bathing every day. It's supposed to ward off evil spirits. And this one is for sprinkling around your living area." I hesitated. "What's in this powder that I can bathe with it? I have sensitive skin." "It's nothing harmful, mostly pearl powder, which is good for your skin and helps ward off spirits. My family's been doing this for generations, so you've got nothing to worry about. I've encountered many Kumathongs before, but I've never had issues like this. You know, it's still a child after all, and children don't think things through like adults. Trying to reason with it, well, it's unlikely to work. Blaming it for all that's happened, accusing it of murder, I don't think there's enough evidence for that yet. Everything is just speculation at this point. There was once a similar case. The only difference was that the Kumathong in question was the spirit of a child who had died young, brought to Thailand and turned into a Kumathong by a monk. From the day it was brought back, for reasons unknown, people in the family began to suffer from strange diseases and died one after another. There were many rumors surrounding those tragic deaths, but most of the blame was placed on the Kumathong. Despite the malicious gossip, the family remained adamant in protecting it. They believed it was their own child and saw no reason why it would harm its own kin. Before anyone could determine the truth, the Kumathong disappeared. No one knows where it went or whose hands it fell into. After hearing the story, I still didn't understand Daifeng's point and asked, "What do you mean?" My family handled that case. We believed the Kumathong had been switched with an evil spirit. Instead of being created from the family's child, children never intentionally harm anyone, especially not their own family, let alone in such a brutal way. Its disappearance is something to think about too. In the end, we concluded that it must have been manipulated by someone, controlled to do evil. But because we lost track of the Kumathong, we couldn't find out who was behind it or their purpose. Engok asked impatiently, "So what do we do now?" "Let's go to my uncle's house." The house that Daifeng mentioned was quite far. When we arrived, he knocked hard on the door 3 times before opening it. Seeing my confused expression, he laughed. Just a professional rule. Don't worry about it. No, it's not that. I just saw something green. Rising under your skin, I said, stepping back in fear. Dai Feng raised his arm and looked at it closely. So it's really happening. What are you two talking about? Engo gasped, confused. I was about to explain, but Dai Feng stopped me. Ngo can't see it. There's no point in telling her. So, does this mean you're going to die like the others? I asked, nearly in tears. Dai Feng, seeing my distress, reassured me it's okay. Nothing strange is happening yet. No pain or itching. Unconsciously, I raised my own arm and checked it thoroughly. Thank goodness. There's nothing. Before long, Dai Feng's chest and stomach were entirely covered in green streaks, stretching from his neck down his shoulders, all the way to his feet. I clung to his arm, trembling. Why is it spreading so fast? Looking at Dai Feng's calm smile, I suddenly felt immense guilt. To this day, I still don't know where he lives, what his full name is, or even if the name he gave me is real. I've only heard Dai Feng say that he and I are bound by fate, and that he'll always be there to help me whenever I'm in danger. He's always kept his word, despite being sick and unsure of his survival, visiting me every day because he couldn't rest easy. Yet, despite all that, his cold, indifferent demeanor has made me feel that there's always been some sort of distance between us. I'd rather he showed discomfort or fear. It would be less unsettling than this calmness. Just as I thought that, Dai Feng's expression suddenly changed. His face stiffened. It seemed like he couldn't smile anymore. Hey, are you okay? I asked, patting him on the shoulder. He didn't respond. His eyes were frozen, unmoving. A cold wind blew through, and at that moment, Dai Feng collapsed onto my lap. From the exposed areas of his skin, large abscesses began to form, filled with those green creatures that were nesting and breeding inside, crawling in and out of the swollen masses. The abscesses burst open, spraying the slimy, pus-filled liquid everywhere, making me gag. Only Dai Feng's face remained pure and untouched, slightly flushed, as if he was simply asleep. My emotions were in complete turmoil as I watched his blood, now turning from red to green, pour out of the abscesses. Immediately after that, I decided to go to Thailand, back to the shop I had visited before, to find out what was going on. I couldn't let Dai Feng suffer and die like this. The shopkeeper greeted me with the same friendly smile as before and asked, "What would you like to buy? Don't you remember me? Oh, now I remember. You're the special one." Special? Yes, in all the years I've run this shop, you're the first person a Kumathong has chosen as its master. How's it going? Living peacefully with it? It's killed 5 people already. Do you think that's peaceful? What are you really up to? What do you mean it's killed 5 people? Did it really? His shocked expression only made me more confused. Could it be that he really didn't know about the Kumathong killing people? His pale, speechless face didn't seem like that of someone lying. Seeing his trembling body, I felt more certain. But then again, maybe he was just a good actor. Thinking that, I calmed myself and continued. You made that thing to harm people. And now you're acting scared of your own creation? Don't pretend. Believe me or not, that's up to you. But it was the Kumathong that signaled to me, saying it wanted to go with you. There must be a reason. Kumathongs never choose their master on their own. So, even if you come looking for me now, it won't change anything. Whatever happens between you and it is because of the karma between you two. You liked it when you took it in, didn't you? When it came to you, you became its master. And now you want to blame me for everything. Is it because I threw it off the 16th floor and broke a piece of its arm? That it hates me now and is killing people out of revenge? I want to destroy it before it kills anyone else. What do I have to do? 5 people have already died. The 6th could be next. You have to help me. How can you just say it's not your problem? Mentioning the 6th person, I asked, all right. Have you ever heard of a disease where strange green creatures parasitize the body? The shopkeeper sighed. Someone has that disease. I nodded. He asked, what are the symptoms? After I described them in detail, he remained silent for a while before saying, prepare yourself. I was confused. What do you mean? Prepare for what? I once heard a senior monk here talk about a disease with symptoms like the ones you described. But it's entirely different from Morglons. People with such skin diseases are often diagnosed with parasitic infections from eating raw meat, or it's dismissed as a psychological condition, a delusional parasitosis. In reality, there are no parasites. At least, that's what I've heard. But the disease I'm referring to, from Thai folklore, is entirely different. They aren't parasites, and they can't be seen. I frowned. Not parasites. Then what are they? All I've heard is that once they enter someone's body, they spread quickly. When they've fully taken over and infected the blood, the person is certain to die. What I meant by preparing is getting ready for that person's funeral. There's no point searching for a cure anymore. But I refused to give up. Following the shopkeeper's directions, I went to a temple. There was quite a crowd of visitors. The main hall, where I needed to meet the senior monk, was packed with people sitting and standing, waiting for their turn. I heard some had been waiting since early morning. Some came out in tears, while others left smiling. My heart felt heavy and gloomy. Clutching the bag holding the Kumathong tightly, I waited outside for my turn. When I finally entered, the room was brighter and larger than I expected, with modern furnishings. As I was looking around, I suddenly heard a voice, "How can I help you?" I was startled by the sudden voice from inside. As I entered the main altar, I saw a monk sitting in a meditative posture. Hearing my footsteps, he slowly opened his eyes and repeated, "How can I help you?" I took out the Kumathong from my bag and placed it on the table. The moment he saw it, his expression turned furious. He grabbed it and was about to throw it away. Not understanding, I immediately stopped him. He yelled, "It must be destroyed now, or it will kill more people." In my mind, I thought a senior monk shouldn't behave so harshly. I also felt that hurting the Kumathong in this way wouldn't destroy it. It would only make it angrier and cause more harm. When the Kumathong slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground, It luckily didn't crack further. Under the astonished and angry stares of the people around, I quickly picked it up and left, saying I no longer needed help. After rushing out, I sat down, panting, on a stone bench under a Bodhi tree. After resting for a while, I noticed an old monk sweeping the yard, staring intently at the Kumathong in my hands. I thought he might know something, so I decided to approach him and ask why the senior monk inside had been so angry. He shook his head. I asked again, "Could you help me figure out what this is?" "All things have their own fate," he said, shaking his head once more before turning away. I sighed and stood up to leave. Just as I reached the door, 2 young monks stopped me and asked me to return to the temple. By this time, the temple had quieted down. The silence made me feel less anxious. The young monks led me to the back of the main hall. Inside, I saw the same senior monk from earlier, trembling on the floor. Beside him was an elderly monk, pointing to his forehead and placing his other hand on his chest, chanting something in a language I couldn't understand. Hearing the chants made me feel slightly dizzy, but I pushed through and entered. To my surprise, the monk chanting was the old man who had been sweeping the yard. The young monk whispered to the elderly monk, "Master, the person you called for is here," as the larger monk collapsed onto a pillow beneath him. The old monk gestured for me to come closer and asked, "What did you bring into the main altar earlier?" Once again, I took out the Kumathong and placed it on the table, holding it in his hands for a while. The monk sighed. Such immense resentment, such deep hatred. "As soon as you left, my disciple ended up like this." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room, followed by chaos. The senior monk began hiding, screaming, and ducking under tables and behind Buddha statues. It was only then that I realized the elderly monk was the head monk I had been searching for, not the younger one. It turned out the head monk was highly knowledgeable about medicine, both Eastern and Western. According to him, the senior monk had a condition known as Alice in Wonderland syndrome, a neurological disorder that affects perception, causing disorientation and hallucinations of size distortion. The senior monk saw everything around him as gigantic, which explained his terror. It's similar to how geese perceive humans, as their retinas are different from ours. Humans appear tiny to them, which is why geese don't fear humans and can be quite aggressive, seeing us as small creatures. I had placed a lot of hope in the head monk, expecting his medical expertise to help both me and Daifeng. I even hoped he could resolve the conflict between me and the Kumathong, but he still repeated the same words as before. All things are born with their own fate. Seeing my desperation, he reluctantly agreed to help one time, breaking his usual rules. With a sigh, he took a medium-sized glass jar from a high shelf, containing some plant roots soaking inside. He extracted a small amount into a smaller bottle and instructed me to bring it back for Daifeng to drink. He told me that from here on out, everything depended on him, and not to return to the temple looking for him. I immediately flew back to Vietnam. As soon as I landed, I called Daifeng to ask where he was, but the person who answered was an older woman. "Are you An Bin?" "Yes." "Can I speak with Daifeng?" "Come to this address." It was my first time visiting Daifeng's house, and I was a bit nervous. I was in a rush to save him, so I didn't take the time to look around or notice the details of his home. I just wanted to see him as soon as possible to find out how he was doing. When I entered his room, I saw him sitting up in bed, reading something. He looked a bit better than when I had left. I heard that his family's secret medicine had been used to hold off the illness until I returned with the remedy. Daifeng suddenly stared at me intently, waving me over. I asked what was wrong, but he didn't answer, only saying, "Sit on the bed. Turn your back." Nervously, I did as he said, and he suddenly grabbed me from behind, surprising me. I struggled and shouted, "What are you doing?" "Let go, or I'll scream." "Stay still. You're in danger." Then I heard him muttering some incantations, and my whole body turned ice cold. A few minutes later, he let go of me, reached for a water bottle on the bedside table, and poured some of the liquid from the small bottle on the bookshelf into it. Then he shook it up and soaked a corner of a small face towel with the mixture. Gently, he wiped from the center of my forehead, spreading it outward toward my eyebrows. Suddenly, my whole body felt warm again. I felt light and relaxed, as if all the pressure and fatigue had melted away. My limbs completely loosened. Finally, Daifeng exhaled and patted my shoulder, saying, "It's done." "What did you just do?" "The spirits that were clinging to you. Getting all the way here means they weren't ordinary spirits. Temples and ancient trees are full of wandering souls. You brought a whole pack of Thai spirits back with you." Startled, I twisted around, trying to check behind my back for any signs. Seeing my panicked reaction, Daifeng couldn't help but laugh and reassured me, "It's okay now." "What are you doing?" Remembering the bottle I had brought, I pulled it out of my bag and told him, "Drink this quickly." "What is it?" "Just drink it, and I'll explain." "How are your wounds?" "Let me see." Daifeng was wearing long pajamas, covering his whole body, so I couldn't see his skin. Worried that he might die, I was a bit over the top and tried to lift his shirt to check. Feeling embarrassed, he quickly said, "Just dilute the medicine in water. I can't drink it straight." Suddenly, a man outside the garden pressed his face against the glass window of Daifeng's room and pounded on it hard, startling me so much that I almost dropped the medicine bottle. The man looked quite disheveled, with dirt smudged on his face, his long black hair covering one side. His body was filthy. Before I could ask Daifeng about him, a loud barking sound startled me again. I turned to see a large yellow dog scratching furiously at the glass. "It's fine. That's the gardener. He's the reincarnation of an Arhat subduing tigers. And that's not a dog. It's a tiger, his steed," Daifeng said, laughing as he waved the man to take the dog away and continue his work. The gardener. I started to ask if the man had mental issues and thought he was an Arhat, but I stopped when Daifeng's mother entered the room, carrying a tray of orange juice. She smiled kindly at me and said, "I heard you're having trouble with a Kumathong." "Yes. Don't worry too much. Some Kumathongs get blamed for killing innocent people, but that's not entirely true. Kumathongs were originally created as protective charms, meant to bring peace and luck. It's only when they're made using dark, twisted methods for selfish purposes, or when their caretakers are corrupt, greedy, and seek too much, that the Kumathong becomes controlled by the dark desires of its owner. It's forced to bring in as much wealth as possible in a short time. At that point, it's no longer a true Kumathong. These instant benefits come with consequences, which are what people need to be aware of. But few care about the consequences. Living with a spirit, the balance between yin and yang is disrupted. Like sleeping on ice for too long, cold energy invades the body, causing strange illnesses, leading to untimely deaths without warning. Do Kumathongs absorb human energy? I asked, curious. In my experience, a Kumathong wouldn't find much use in human souls. Spirits, ghosts, and deities all originate from human belief. Put simply, when we place our full belief in something, that belief can eventually manifest into reality. If we worship a stone daily, over time it may develop a spiritual essence, and what it does afterward is guided by the intentions of the person who worships it. It's the same with Kumathongs. If the caretaker is upright and honest, and speaks to it positively every day, reciting sutras or mantras, then the Kumathong will be like a blank sheet of paper, gradually absorbing those positive energies and becoming a well-behaved, gentle child, reflecting the goodness it's learned from its caretaker. But, of course, life is full of thashlands, but also many less things. Most people who raise Kumathongs, aside from offering them a few treats and sweets, only give them commands and demands, nothing more. The love they offer is nothing but manipulation, masked as affection, asking for returns on their investment. Raising a Kumathong is like raising a wild tiger. If you don't know how to handle it, it'll eventually devour you. When the original kindness gets twisted, when we believe that having a Kumathong will change our lives and constantly make demands, the good things we try to impart are empty. It's like someone claiming to be a devoted lay practitioner, eating vegetarian and reciting scriptures every day, but their mind is constantly filled with greed, anger, and desire. It's all just a facade. Not to mention, there are so many fake Kumathongs out there now. In the end, it's just a lifeless doll absorbing human belief until it develops spiritual essence. But when people place too much belief in these lifeless objects, they unintentionally turn themselves into abnormal people, becoming withdrawn, fearful, or isolated from society. This leads to severe psychological issues, often resulting in self-harm, or even suicide. This is a common issue among Kumathong caretakers today. Oh, I got carried away and forgot about the soup I'm making. It's almost dinner time. You should stay for dinner before you go home. You rest and talk with Anbin. She just narrowly escaped drowning, thanks to the protection of her ancestors, she said as she left the room, responding to Daifong's father calling from outside. Once she had left and closed the door, I immediately asked, "Who pulled you underwater?" "It's nothing. I was just swimming with friends at night. I hadn't even gotten into the water yet. I was walking around to warm up when a cold gust of wind blew up from the pool, making me feel faint. It was a strange feeling. It made me feel so cold and lonely deep inside. Sensing something bad was about to happen, I tried to stay calm. But just as I reached the edge of the pool, a slimy hand suddenly shot up and grabbed my leg, pulling me under. I slipped and hit my hip hard on the pool's edge. Luckily, I didn't hit my head. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. Hearing this made me anxious, and I rushed over to lift his shirt, checking for any bruises or broken bones. But this time, as if prepared, Daifeng quickly moved aside, frowning. I don't like being touched by women. I wasn't doing anything. I just wanted to see if you were hurt. Let me take a look, I protested, refusing to let it go. But in the end, I had to give in to his stubbornness. I asked, "Who saved you from drowning?" When I was sinking, my lungs were burning, about to burst from the water pressure. I thought I was going to die, but suddenly I felt my body being thrown upward. I was covered in a slimy, fishy-smelling substance, shaking uncontrollably. My friend tried to perform some first aid, and I woke up. He was stammering, pointing at my arm in horror. When I looked, I saw a small child's hand still gripping my wrist tightly. When I got home, my father said the enchanted bracelet passed down from our ancestors had saved my life. A child's hand. I quickly pulled out the Kumathong from my bag and, sure enough, it was missing the hand as Daifeng had described. Was it trying to kill you? Do you remember what it looked like or what it wanted? At that moment, I felt like I was surrounded by a white void. Far away, there was a naked child, its skin pale as death, its face sorrowful, the complexion of someone long dead. Its eyes were filled with confusion, like a child seeing a stranger for the first time. Its tiny mouth slowly opened wider and wider, pitch black, taking over most of its face. It began running toward me. When it grabbed my wrist, I didn't even have time to react before I was thrown up, hearing the child's loud scream. All I remember is that its hand was slippery and very cold. When did this happen? If I'm not mistaken, the night you encountered it. I witnessed the entire event too, but I couldn't reach you. As its slimy face started bubbling with white foam, like acid eating away at it, revealing bone, it brushed against my face. That's when I jolted awake, thinking it was just a nightmare. But I didn't realize it had actually pulled you into the water at that very moment. Wait. I also saw Ingok being pushed toward the balcony, halfway over the edge. Could it be? I quickly called Njok, but fortunately, she was safe. As soon as I hung up, I heard the sound of water gushing from the bathroom. I looked at Daifeng, silently asking who was in there. But he just shook his head and walked over. Of course, as usual, when we looked inside, there was nothing. The floor was dry, and the faucet wasn't leaking. You'll probably experience these hallucinations countless times from now on. When it becomes unbearable, remember to bite your finger. It's better if it bleeds. Then, touch your forehead and draw a line upward to your hairline. That should help, Daifeng advised. Using the technique Daifeng had shown me, I was able to bring Njok back to her senses before she jumped off her balcony, by biting her finger until it bled. I also saved myself from tumbling down the stairs. At that moment, I had seen a terrifying child crouching in the corner behind me, but there were no stairs in front of me. Njok said she had been chasing a strange, man who had snatched a valuable bracelet her father had given her for her birthday. They hadn't noticed a balcony. I gradually began to see the child more clearly. It seemed to have a deformity in its legs, with atrophied, misshapen muscles, making it unable to walk normally, moving in a semicolon-like shape. That's why it always moved so slowly or stayed in one spot. It had harmed so many people, yet for some reason, I was the exception. Once, I saw it stumbling toward me before tripping and falling, about 10 steps away. Even though I was terrified, my reflexes kicked in, and I rushed to catch it. Just as I reached it, the tall bookshelf behind me, filled with books, suddenly collapsed. When I looked back in shock, I saw countless dark shadows clinging to the bookshelf, emitting horrifying sounds. It was as if they were all furious. For the first time, I saw the child's face up close and clear. It was hideous and grotesque, even though I didn't want to. I couldn't deny that I had never seen a child so bizarre before. Its skin was wrinkled and saggy, and its body was deformed. But its eyes were strangely innocent and pure, showing no anger as it stared back at me. Somehow, I mustered the courage to reach out and hugged it tightly. At that moment, I suddenly felt an invisible force, like a fiery hot ring, searing my arm and the child's body, causing it to scream in pain, thrashing wildly. I panicked, not knowing what to do, but I couldn't touch it anymore. All I could do was repeatedly ask, "What's wrong? What's happening?" The child disappeared in an instant, leaving me with countless questions and conflicting emotions. Why did it save me? Kumathong Chapter 6. Still feeling confused and unsure of what to do, I suddenly noticed something like a child's hand sticking out from behind the fallen bookshelf. It filled me with both fear and curiosity. Gathering my courage, I moved closer and saw that it was a Kumathong doll. Thinking it was my Kumathong, I hurried over and picked it up. It was only then that I remembered I hadn't brought mine with me. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was a completely different Kumathong. My Kumathong had several scratches from being knocked around, along with the dent in its arm and the burn marks from when it touched Dai, Fong's protective bracelet. But none of those marks were present on this one. Puzzled for a moment, I took it to the librarian and asked, "Do you know who this doll belongs to?" The librarian adjusted her glasses, looked at it slowly, then replied, "Probably left behind by someone who was here before you." "Okay, I'll leave it here. If someone comes looking for it, you can return it to them." I placed the Kumathong carefully on the small shelf behind her, used for storing library records, and then left. When I got home, I followed Dai Fong's instructions, sprinkling the protective powder around the house and mixing some into my bathwater. Exhausted, I collapsed without realizing it, even though my hair was still wet. The house, located on the outskirts of the city, was eerily quiet at night, with only the sound of insects chirping. The rain had just started. The soft patter of raindrops on the roof and the creeping cold against my skin made me stir and wake up. I curled up, pulling the blanket tightly over my chest. The room was dim and unfamiliar, and the earthy, grassy scent that arose from the rain made the air feel stifling and hard to breathe. My head and ears buzzed, hollow and empty. I closed my eyes and tossed and turned for a while, but still couldn't fall back asleep. A vague sense of fear hung over me, as if something terrible was about to happen. Near dawn, too tired to stay awake, I pulled my legs up and finally drifted off. In my dreams, strange scenes shifted and changed constantly, as if I had been thrown into a game where I had to run, exhausted, from one place to another. I was searching for something. Though I didn't know what, just that, I had to find it. Eventually, I found my mother. She was sitting with her head down in a vast, white space. Everything was covered in a thick layer of white, except for her long, black hair, which stood out against the stark background, cascading down and obscuring her face. I couldn't understand what was happening. I wondered why my mother was there. Wasn't she supposed to be back home with my father? I hesitantly approached her. Before I could reach out to touch her shoulder, blood suddenly spread out from nowhere, staining the white space beneath my feet and soaking the pristine white shirt I was wearing. Blood. Where's it coming from? Panicked, I stepped back, wiping my nose because I felt a sharp pain there. Blood poured out, streaming down both sides and filling my mouth, the metallic taste making me gag. Why is my nose bleeding? Mum, can you hear me? Before, whenever this happened, my mother would hold me tightly, telling me it was okay while keeping my head in a position to stop the blood from flowing. But now, as my nose bled uncontrollably, my mother said nothing. She only raised her head, her long black hair still obscuring her face, motioning for me not to come closer. Then, she slowly raised her hand and tapped her fingers against her head a few times, before falling into a gaping black hole beneath her feet. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The uneasy feeling from the dream still lingered. I reached under my pillow for my phone and saw that it was still early, but I decided to call my parents anyway. No one answered. I told myself they're probably still asleep and tried to go back to sleep. This time, there were no more restless dreams, and I slept straight through to noon. But it was strange. My parents had seen my call by now, yet they still hadn't called me back. Growing anxious, I called them several more times, but no one picked up. Fearful thoughts began creeping into my mind. I sat up and started calling other relatives back home to check on them. But they all said my parents hadn't come back home. Could they have gone somewhere else before returning home? No, that's impossible. Then where have they been all this time? What's happened? Why would they lie to me? As I spiraled into panic, the phone call came through. It was my dad. I answered immediately, asking urgently, "Where are you and Mum? Don't lie to me anymore." There was a brief silence before my dad finally spoke with difficulty. "Telling me to come to the hospital?" he said. My mum had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. I quickly packed a few things and booked the earliest flight. As soon as I arrived, I rushed to the room my dad had told me about over the phone. From the door, I saw my father holding my mother's hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. My mother lay on the bed, looking frail and shrunken, as if she had aged decades overnight. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I burst into tears, pushing open the door and running in to hug my mother as she lay limp on the bed. She looked at me, surprised, but couldn't muster the strength to sit up. she asked weakly. "Who told you I was here?" Before coughing violently, clutching her chest. "It's all my fault. All my fault. I made a mistake." Though still coughing, my mother tried to calm me down, patting my shoulder weakly as she said, "I'm fine. Don't cry. The tumor is still small. It just needs to be operated on." A nurse arrived to administer medication, so my dad gestured for me to step outside. Sitting on a bench, he said, "Your mum will have surgery next week." I remained silent. Given the current situation, the risk of complications during surgery is very low, but life is unpredictable. So even though your mum didn't want me to, I called you. Just in case, if anything were to happen, you'd be able to say goodbye to each other. My dad lowered his head, staring at the ground as he spoke. His sadness seemed to cast a dark cloud over everything around us, and I couldn't stop myself from crying. I stood up, intending to go back to my mother's room, but my dad stopped me. "The medication makes her very tired. She'll fall asleep soon. You should go to the hotel and get some rest. Visit her again tomorrow." The next day, the doctor informed us that my mother's surgery could be performed in 2 days, with an almost guaranteed success rate, which gave me some relief. But I still couldn't shake the lingering worry. I wondered what happened to the Kumathong. Why has it hurt so many people? And what about Daifong? But no matter how much I thought about it, I had to push everything aside to focus on taking care of my mother. That morning, since my mum wasn't used to hospital food, I went out to find something more appetizing for her. While waiting for the food, I had the strange feeling that someone was staring at me. When I turned around, there was no one. But when I looked again, I saw a man sitting from a distance, staring at me intently without blinking. He seemed frozen, unmoving. As I moved closer, he quickly grabbed his wallet, threw some bills on the table, and left in a hurry, without even waiting for the server to bring his food. He disappeared with a sense of urgency, though I found it odd. I didn't recognize him and soon forgot about the encounter. After my mother ate, she fell asleep again. I walked down the hallway, planning to get some fresh air, but I nearly fell when I bumped into someone on the stairs. As I looked up, ready to scold the person for not paying attention, I froze when I saw it was the same strange man from earlier that morning. I immediately thought he might be here because he had some kind of illness, perhaps a mental disorder. Seeing him still dazed from the impact, I asked worriedly, "Are you okay?" Leaning against the wall in pain, he finally looked up at me when he heard my voice. But instead of responding, he looked at me as if I were a ghost, then fled in a panic. Annoyed, I went to the bathroom to check myself in the mirror. My clothes are neat. My face doesn't look that bad. What's wrong with this guy? This is the second time. I couldn't let it go. When I stepped back out, I quietly followed in the direction he had run. As soon as I spotted him again, I ran up and grabbed his sleeve, asking, "Why are you running?" He looked terrified and shook his head repeatedly. "Why do you keep running away every time you see me?" The strange man said nothing, just pulled my hand off and walked away. How weird. Is he mute or something? I shouted after him one last time, "If you can't speak, you can write it down." But he didn't look back and vanished around the corner of the staircase. I called Daifeng to tell him about the man, and he said, "Could it be that he saw the Kumathong, or some spirit clinging to you and got scared? How have you been feeling lately?" "Tired from looking after my mom, but otherwise okay. No aches or pains." "I wish I had brought some of that powder to protect myself," I said regretfully. "Is there a temple nearby?" "You should go there and ask for help," Daifeng suggested. Following his advice, I searched on Google Maps and went to the nearest temple. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt strange. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed by an intense feeling of loneliness and despair. My shoulders felt as if something heavy was pressing down on them, leaving me exhausted and weary. It weighed so much that I couldn't even lift my head properly. The deeper I went inside, the dizzier I became, my head spinning. A young monk, noticing my unsteady posture, hurried over to help, offering me his shoulder for support. As soon as I entered the main hall, I collapsed under the weight of the large Buddha statues surrounding me. "Worried?" the monk asked. "Are you okay?" Barely able to speak, I whispered that I needed help from the head monk. Though he didn't seem to understand, he helped me out to the backyard, which was old and somewhat dilapidated. The head monk there reminded me of the old monk in Thailand as he slowly swept the yard. Seeing me struggling, my vision blurred. He set his broom aside and, with the help of the young monk, guided me inside. Pouring a cup of tea, he slid it toward me and asked, "You've had trouble with the Kumathong spirit, but don't worry too much about it. What you sow is what you reap. That's all I can tell you." Seeing my confusion, he smiled kindly and asked, "Did you believe in the Buddha before?" I nodded slightly. "And now?" he asked. I said nothing, just sat there in silence. In the past, I would have immediately nodded without hesitation, no matter how many times someone asked. But now, after everything that's happened, my faith had been shaken so much, I didn't know what to believe in anymore. He smiled again and spoke calmly. "You don't need to believe in anything. Just believe deeply in the law of cause and effect. You might feel right now that life has no such thing as karma or retribution, but trust in it more. Trust in the future. Have faith in destiny." Patting my shoulder and head a few times, the head monk left. After returning from the temple, I felt a slight fever, but nothing too serious. Probably just a common cold. I didn't see that strange man again, until one afternoon, a few days after our last encounter. I had just stepped out of my mother's hospital room when I saw him walking up from the stairs, but this time it was different. He acted as if he didn't see me and walked right past. Annoyed, I grabbed his sleeve again, but I immediately regretted it, realizing I was being too aggressive. Letting go of his sleeve, I forced a smile and asked, "Where are you going?" He looked at me, confused, and asked, "Who are you? What are you doing?" I was taken aback. Could he be mentally ill and suffering from memory loss? Or maybe he had a twin? How could he look at me with such fear? Just a few days ago and now act like we've never met. I was about to ask more when a nurse passing by called out and asked a strange question. "Hey, do you two know each other?" Embarrassed, I replied, "No, we don't know each other. We've just run into each other a few times." "This is key," my son. And you are, and been. As I spoke with his mother, Key said nothing, his head down, before quickly walking away. His mother, clearly used to this behavior, remained cheerful, making polite conversation with me as if nothing was wrong. But I only responded briefly, as my real concern wasn't their family issues. What mattered to me was whether Key had actually seen spirits or something else. And more importantly, what exactly had he seen in me? My mother's health gradually improved, though she was still not fully stable. My dad had to return home to deal with some family matters, so I stayed in the hospital, sleeping on the empty bed next to hers to take care of her. I didn't know if I hadn't fully recovered from my cold or if something else was wrong, but my whole body felt heavy, like I was weighed down with lead. I was frequently dizzy and short of breath. Whenever I was in the room with my mother, pouring water or feeding her, or stepping out to use the restroom at night, I always had the sensation that someone was watching me, but I never saw anyone. That night, the hospital had a water outage, so it was late before I could finally shower. The water was cold, so I hurried through it. The feeling of being watched persisted, along with cold drafts that blew against my back, as if someone was standing right behind me, breathing icy breaths down my neck. I was trembling from both fear and cold. I shook my head hard, trying to clear my thoughts and reassure myself that I was just overthinking. I quickly dried off and reached for my clothes. Suddenly, the strong smell of disinfectant hit me. I'm allergic to that smell, and it immediately made my throat tighten. Before I could even finish dressing, I froze because I heard a knock on the door. It was clearly coming from my bathroom door. Listening closely, I could even hear what sounded like snoring. I stood still for a few minutes, and when I didn't hear any more strange sounds, I let out a sigh of relief, thinking I had imagined it. I hurried to finish getting dressed and gathered my things to head back to the room. But just as I touched a doorknob, a loud bang echoed from outside, right where my hand had been. I was so startled I went pale, my heart pounding as I backed up against the wall. Cold sweat drenched me as,